Hi, welcome to the first design talk of the summer semester 2024 at the Academy of Visual Arts. Today, as our guest for the first session, we have Space Popular here with us. As for the structure of the session, we will have a 45-minute presentation from our guests. And if you had any questions, please write it down. We will get to you in the last 15 minutes. So Space Popular is directed by Lara Lesmes and Fredrik Hellberg, which are here with us today. And they both studied at Architectural Association in London. They founded their practice in Bangkok in 2013 and have been based in London and Space since 2016. Space Popular creates spaces, objects, and events in both physical and virtual space, concentrating on how the two realms can blend together. The studio has completed buildings, exhibitions, public artworks, furniture collections, and interiors across Asia and Europe, as well as virtual architecture for the immersive internet. So we are very excited to have you here with us today. With no further ado, I will give the stage to you guys, and thank you.
Great. Hello, thank you so much, Darsa, for that introduction. Hi, everyone. So great to be here.
Hi.
Hi, everyone. So we will get straight into it. As Darsa said, we're going to speak for about 45 minutes or so. And only one of us will be speaking at any given time. So the other person can answer questions live, maybe even.
Let's see if we are coordinated enough to do that, but feel free to type in questions as we are talking, because I know it's easy to forget later on. So we're very happy to do that. Okay, so we're going to start today with a talk on what we call the fabric of physical teleportation. This might sound a bit abstract at first. But basically what we are talking about is the wide array of online gathering spaces, or basically the internet in 3D, which is something that we have been very interested in for a very long time and practically involved in during the past 10 years. We are talking about basically spaces where you come in with your full body as an avatar, and here we can see some versions of Fredrik. I don't know if you have, yeah, in many of these different worlds. And even though this might seem as something quite futuristic, we are quite interested in the strange moment that we live right now, where we are basically having a social reality that happens across multiple mediums. And we are attending talks or attending gatherings or meetings of all kinds in many different ways, and often in very haphazard ways, where we link things together with very simple means, and things happen across many different types of devices. All of it, of course, moving to a not so far future that is both exciting and scary, of basically all the screens going away, and our prediction that by the middle of the 21st century, most media will be spatial. So we want to cover a little bit our work in this area, which is both design, proposals, research, and also cautionary tales. Because as I said, we are both very interested and very scared by this. But just we could first start with a brief intro. I mean, although Dorsa already did an amazing job, but well, we are involved in a bunch of different academic institutions where we have been professors throughout the past 15 years, and we have been running our practice at the same time. So this has allowed us to stay involved in both academia and practice simultaneously, or develop those two areas very much in parallel and very linked to one another. but we have designed all kinds of things from music stages, as we see here, to buildings of all scales, from neighborhoods to small cabins. We have also worked on interiors, where we have developed full interior schemes where everything has been designed by us, including furniture collections that we have designed and fabricated specifically for those spaces. We also work as architects in a more conventional sense, where we work with buildings, to design and build buildings. But what we are going to be talking about today concerns more our work in this area. So as I was mentioning, we do quite a lot of research on the area of the intersection of space and media, architecture and media. And much of these works manifest in the form of spatial installations that involve physical space, as well as a film, usually an immersive film, a VR film, that is linked to that space. We see examples of other works that we have been doing that involve screens or involve no media at all, but are still talking about media, like the globe that we're seeing here that tells the story of the internet infrastructure across the globe, or work that deals with the history of media, as we see, for example, in the image that shows this tapestry room, where we are looking at the tapestry being one of the early forms of media. Linking to that work on textiles, we have worked quite a lot with large printing or different means to bring virtual worlds to the physical realm that are not necessarily the screen, because we are particularly interested in these different ways of coming together. And this is one of the projects that we wanted to maybe start going a little bit deeper into. Fredrik, if you want to take it.
Yeah, so here we see one of the events that we had in the gallery at ArkDes in Stockholm. This show was our second solo show, and it's kind of remains one of our most important ones. It covers a kind of speculation on the future of the city, specifically in this case, Stockholm, in a future where most of the inhabitants of a city can perceive that environment through a digital filter. So basically through AR, not just as a novelty where you have your phone, but literally through the glasses that you wear every day. So you see here these murals that are picking out a few examples of typical kind of Stockholm environments and envisioning what they might be like if each single inhabitant sees the city through their own filter. Just a quick overview over the gallery. This is often the way we work. We kind of transform the gallery space into like a diagram. We picked out a few environments, and then they are kind of arranged in the room where the center is sort of 100% virtuality and going out from there. And then often we produce these highly graphic diagrams that in this case kind of are reminiscent of a carpet, where we can see here the center point going outwards. For this project and many other projects, we also write a lot, as Lara was mentioning earlier. Even though we work with these kind of technologies, we are very cautious, and many other projects are perhaps more cautionary tales than actually like kind of positive visions of this future, but we can discuss that afterwards. But in this exhibition, we wrote these 10 propositions, of which one, number 5 here, spatial experiences will become increasingly specific and tailored to its dwellers, which is one of the main arguments of this exhibition. Here we see an example of like a typical luxury Stockholm apartment where the conversation you're having is literally coming out of the router in physical, where it looks like physical form. Other examples, a typical kind of hipster cafe where the tiles of the wall are turning into kind of cryptocurrency live data feed. And another example, which perhaps is the most interesting one, takes this metro station, Östermalmstorg, as an example, where feminist artist Siri Derkert in the 60s created an artwork, which very interestingly, it's physically quite simple. It's just concrete that has been sandblasted. Here we see Siri sandblasting the concrete. So it's materially not something that's special, but it's incredibly valuable and special for the messages in the concrete. So we took this artwork and then kind of imagined that if you're standing in a place like this, in a very public space, in a metro station, and what you are seeing, this public artwork that has art that is inscribed into a physical material, but virtually those political messages could potentially be unique to you or to a specific group. That both comes with great dangers and opportunities, perhaps. Also in this exhibition, like many others, we do use spatial media. And in this case, it was quite a unique, something we have not done since and haven't seen anywhere either. If you put on the headset in the exhibition, you were seeing a live version of the exhibition that was linked to an online platform. So you were occupying an avatar, and anyone in the world could join that space so that you could actually have conversations with people across the world about this topic, where we often joined and did virtual guided tours, which was quite exciting. We've also considered maybe even more actually what this technology is doing to our homes and our domestic environments. And we do a lot of research on what the companies that are building these technologies, what visions they have for our future homes. And if you ever tried one of these headsets, you've probably seen one of these things. Obviously, when you're wearing a headset, you're blinded, but you might be moving around a lot. So these companies, they literally dictate in many ways the way that you should be using your home and even relate to your own family members or people that you share your domestic environment with. And they themselves create this, what we think extremely dystopic images. We can see here a person looking at a child that seems to be looking at the adult, like, why are you in the room but not with me? These companies, they also produce these layouts for kind of encouraging certain layouts of rooms, and we're very interested in how this is kind of at the moment having an effect on homes. And this is kind of an interesting example. This is a meme from a few years ago now, but it's actually quite accurate for people that use this technology. We've also done a few projects such as this kind of project envisioning what our own home, how it kind of changes depending on what VR experience we're using and what kind of social setting we're kind of engaged in. And as we will speak a bit more now about our other projects, we do a lot of historical research as well, and we're very interested in how media affects the space we use. Not only domestic environments, but of course, mainly domestic environments. And we'll speak a little bit about another project here that's called the Venn Room, which speculates on the future of virtual togetherness in the home in the age of spatial media. So basically, what will it be like to be together when you see each other as avatars and you're actually roaming around inside your own home? Creating what we in 2018 actually coined the term Venn Room, which is basically this diagram is pretty clear, that like if you are in two separate apartments across the world, one in Hong Kong and one in Bogota, whatever, then wherever you end up being, part of your home and my home gets overlapped and exists in the same space, creating a Venn diagram or a Venn room in this case. And we're really interested in kind of the potential future scenarios where these clashes maybe start to become meaningful, that if you share these clashes and overlaps over many years, you might start to create ornaments or embellishments to kind of commemorate some of these moments, or many of these moments will probably just be extremely random and something that at the moment seems very strange, but probably something that we will be very used to in the future. There's something also that we've done workshops with students around the world. It's a very simple workshop that if you're curious, you can do yourself with these simple instructions. Imagine that 3 different people are going to live together in a Venn room. You tape the layout of these rooms out on the floor and you try to create the most meaningful and interesting overlap you can. And then you role play what it's like to live in that Venn room. We've also done kind of other examples of this project we call the global home. So basically imagining what it's like to live in this sort of endless map of domestic environments that are linked together. And in 2021, we created an immersive film, which is in one of these rooms with 16 projectors that imagines a sort of fictional life of several people living in one of these global homes.
But by far we are not the first ones to be concerned with these issues. Of course, we saw also a wave of theory and proposals developed around these topics in the earlier wave of VR, with also the early wave of the internet, like this competition organized by the company Any Magazine, or any corporation that ran Any Magazine, where there was an incredible array of people, I mean, mostly men, that were invited to make proposals for the virtual house. And most of them, like the well-known dinosaurs of the time, would do things such as this. I mean, they were very oriented to like very conceptual approaches of what a virtual house would be. But interestingly, and specifically for architects, even though in this environment we're not in an architecture school, but the work of Herzog and de Meuron at that time, or the proposal of them at that time, is very surprising if one compares it with what they are doing now, which was basically a website where you could customize the atmospheres of your home, which we think is actually the one that really hits an interesting chord in this area. So besides our more speculative proposals on what might happen in the future, or what might this future look like, or what it should look like, we have also been involved in creating some of these spaces today, and with the constraints of today, when most people is accessing online gathering spaces through all kinds of devices. Many people might even access from a very weak internet connection and with a mobile phone. So we've been very interested in experimenting with environments that are contained in and very easily accessible from the browser, also that are not part of bigger platforms, so that we can moderate and be sure that there is no data gathered that is unnecessary. And this is something that we have been developed more recently, but now 10 years ago or 11 years ago is when we actually did the first concept for one of these spaces. We still had never seen a headset. We didn't know all these things that were going to happen in the last 3 years, but we have a hunch that some of the spaces that we are inhabiting very much in text-based and text and image-based platforms, which is social media, could take a three-dimensional turn. And this is the project that we're seeing here. That is actually, you can watch the whole thing on our website, The Cloud of Resilience, if you are interested. We followed this with a bunch of different experiments. Many of them were experiments done in academia. I don't know if the video is actually going to load. Maybe we can wait for a second, or we can skip it because it's not super important. But well, basically the video was showing the many different kinds of experiments that would eventually lead to this. Is one of our early immersive film pieces, where you basically have a physical object that a film is linked to. Okay, so this is important because we're going to be talking about this quite a bit. We refer to this as an anchor object for something that then is deployed onto it. So it's a sort of fake AR that we were doing at that time with virtual reality headsets, basically deploying a whole film and a whole narrative over a space, and specifically over certain objects that we refer to as anchors. So a more recent example of that is this exhibition. This piece involves a much longer immersive film. It's almost half an hour, and it develops in 4 acts that are distributed in space across the space of the gallery. So here we see two different moments, basically like two different acts, where you see these people with the headsets are looking at this film. And what this film is about is basically about mass media and its relationship to architecture. This was developed through utilizing the archive of the RIBA in London, and it was prompted, and it all started from this very specific artifact that is Sebastiano Serlio's book on the 5 styles of buildings. Why we were very interested in this piece is because this is the first book on architecture that contains illustrations. And it's also written in Italian as opposed to be written in Latin, which is what people would have done at that time. And we're looking at the 16th century, right? So this book is the first mass media object, the first architectural mass media object. It's the first object that is meant to bring architecture to a very large amount of people, which at the time was unprecedented. So we were looking at the book as a vehicle for buildings to travel through, right? So we are trying to look at media and how basically media moves architecture. Now, just to show very, very briefly, our methodology is very odd because a lot of time is spent basically on spreadsheets, putting data together. Here you see some examples of what this might look like. In the next one, where we look at the different types of data that might need to be gathered. And then we basically bring this into a space. So we organize the whole space as a diagram where the space is organized according to a timeline. And on that timeline, you always know where you are in space. So every year corresponds to basically 2 centimeters in space. So as you move through everything in that point in space is related to that time. And in this case, we were going through basically how media influenced the styles of architecture. So that was a big feature of that, as well as different types of media devices throughout history that then were actually printed on this large carpet that was a sort of map of the structure of this film. But now onto the film itself. The film was deployed over this physical model, which is like a style mashup of all these buildings. And the film was divided in 4 acts, as I was mentioning before. Yeah. And yeah, Fredrik, if you can take it from there on the first and second, and I can come back.
So these would just give a brief overview. Basically, like you would be roaming around in the room and taking on one headset at a time, literally going through time, where Act 1 speaks about, specifically in this context in the UK, this moment when the first book starts to arrive. So this is what you would see through the headset. There's always a little guide. You see this little figure there? There's always a sort of guide or a narrator that's with you throughout the whole film. And this model transforms and many things in the room happens. One example is just quite interesting here, where we can see, those of you who've been to London might recognize the dome of St. Paul's Cathedral that was designed by an architect who never really traveled. And this was all based on a style of architecture that's more common in France and Germany. So all this architecture in London, he built over 50 churches after the Great Fire of London. All of the styles basically came through books. So it's like the first mass media driven kind of architecture movement. Act 2 covers a moment where more and more books start to be translated, and people have the opportunity to more and more have libraries. And also, of course, big libraries were really only the few privileged that could have. But then also the moment when like the camera gets invented and other sorts of strange media devices and the styles that follow. Act 3 covers the 20th century when the television gets introduced, when we not only like read and see pictures of spaces, but we can see spaces inside the television, so television studios, etc. But also when the video game gets introduced, it's the first kind of way that you could in your home interact with an environment through media. And this also then kind of sets off the era that we would say we're sort of in within how we think about space, this kind of strange itemization of architecture, where in video games, and also this is kind of our generation of architects that are now building, the ones that are building, are kind of grown up with this way of thinking, where you have sort of an asset thinking that can look like anything, because you have access to any kind of information about what anything looks like, unlike the previous times where if you wanted to build in a different way, you literally had to travel there and look at it yourself and study it. And the fourth act, final act, covers our current moment and a little bit of the future. So this kind of magical tools that I'm sure you all use and not speak much about, which is like Pinterest, which we actually think it's a simple tool, but it's one of these revolutionary tools simply because it's one of the first moments when we can look for visual material with visual material, like the more like this button that we now see a lot in different media, that has completely revolutionized the way that we search for visual information online. And this also then leads to, together with AI, something that we call architecture at the speed of the spoken word. And this is something that this is really crazy, but at this time in 2020, when we spent 2 years working on this project, we were imagining that sometime in the future there will be AI that will be so fast that you can just say something and what you said materializes in front of you. We literally thought that maybe by 2030 or 2040 we will have this. Now it's kind of already happening. It's not spatial yet, but maybe in a year or 2 weeks, who knows, we will be able to be inside of a virtual environment and say, I want a jungle, and I want this, and I want a castle, and I want this, and it will literally happen as you speak it. So this sort of like media crescendo that we kind of envision, let's say.
Yeah. So anyway, this show was opening in 2010 February. So it opens for 3 weeks and then it closed. We brought it online and then we started developing this whole array of browser-based spaces, all kinds of experiments, from spaces to gather for like the entire school where we were teaching at the time at the Architectural Association, to very personal places for like where we spend time with our nephews and nieces that loved hanging out here as opposed to being on a video call, which they very much dreaded. Then together we designed labyrinths, and then we eventually started realizing that these tools were very powerful, a very powerful means to explore space, and that they were teaching us a lot about the role of physical spaces, and especially the role of symbols and semiotics in physical space. So we moved on to doing quite a lot of experiments on our research studios ourselves and with students, where we here see just a bunch of examples of different kinds of spaces to gather, spaces to browse, to shop, spaces to have meetings and conferences, spaces that fold. And eventually we put together this report that is actually available if anyone is interested in it. Even though this one is not up to date, it's from 2020, 2021, distantcrowds.report, where we, together with, I mean, it was mainly done with students. So they basically describe the virtual gathering per se. And soon after that came one of our biggest commissions ever, to design a whole conference center, but that was virtual. So this was done for a foundation in Spain where they usually have this kind of gathering. It's very important for Spanish and Portuguese young architects, because they give out these awards that are one of the highest recognitions that you can get there. And so it was meant to happen in Barcelona. So they asked us to somehow refer to the city. And we used the city plan of Barcelona to basically create a series of rooms that eventually were organized in a grid that gave you a sense of an endless space. This was very much designed for the screen. So as you see in this image, the there was exhibition spaces, and then there were conference spaces. And as you see, this, for example, exhibition spaces are a corridor that's basically like you're walking into the screen. So it even has the proportions of the screen. But then you can see here that there is an array of spaces that that have different features that were made for different purposes. Possibly the most important aspect and the weirdest one is that we had to design the way people would look like. This was not because we wanted them to fit with the space, but mainly because they needed to be incredibly optimized and lightweight so that people could open this from any device. Right, so we had to give these people enough body language with the minimum amount of megabytes in them, right? And the entire world is basically fits in an email. They don't go beyond 25 megabytes, so it's very fast to open and so on, which is very important for us because that's the aspect of accessibility, right? So when the whole wave of the metaverse came up, we were very much against it. We think that calling it the metaverse is basically an attempt from big tech companies to make it into a product and to say, I made the metaverse, which is absolutely not true. And we think it's always very important to say that, well, we like to say that it's just a more immersive version of the internet, and more immersive in the sense of basically like being able to be surrounded by it or being able to inhabit it three-dimensionally. However, sadly, we saw in 2021 and 22 the bubble of the metaverse that we are very happy that it actually bursted. Where we saw things like this, no? There was attempts to create virtual cities that mimicked very much city maps. This is just an attempt to create an artificial real estate market and to create artificial scarcity, no? So if you build a map, then you have some plots that are closer to the center that can be more expensive, and then you can speculate over inexistent land when it's already a problem that we are speculating over actual land. We think this is pretty awful. So we started to talk about the virtual city. And we went back and we took some very interesting theories about the city, some of them from the architect Aldo Rossi, who basically looks at the city as he describes the city not in the way that the city is exactly in the map, but in the way in which you experience it, which is more like hopping from island to island. There are landmarks, there are moments in the city that might be important for me, and everything in between is like a black thing. No? So my city looks different from your city, but they are still the same city factually, right? This is akin to the psychogeography and situationists, so larger theories of experiences of space, which have been very important for us. And we think this works so well with the way in which we move across virtual spaces, right? So we have these big arrays of worlds, and we basically jump between them. No? We have these interconnections, and these yellow lines that you are seeing here are basically just the ways in which we jump through space, namely teleportation.
And this is actually the biggest problem that the immersive internet has at the moment, because many of these worlds, these platforms, they have up to 100,000 individual worlds, of which each world can be 5 by 5 kilometers. We're talking about an incredible amount of space. And the only way to access them is to go in through the main door into each platform and then back out again and then go into another one. We could almost imagine this as like a city with skyscrapers, of which the skyscrapers are hundreds of kilometers tall. And if you're on the top floor, the only way is to go back down again. And so we are really interested in how in the future we can create a civic teleportation network in between all of them that doesn't yet exist, because to go and hop around these individual worlds is not possible yet. So we've been both very directly and also speculatively very interested in thinking about teleportation and portals. We've done a lot of images, a lot of artworks that kind of either features doors or different kind of envisioning of moving through spaces. We've also had this incredible chance to do things like this, a video installation for the Doksugung Palace in Seoul, South Korea, where we installed a big LED screen in the central gateway that led into the last emperor of Korea's a private area. And we can see here some gifs from the film that kind of very symbolically envisions media objects literally as doors, as gateways. And with many of these speculations, we've been thinking that really, if these speculations are true, then the portal will serve as a kind of everyday means of transportation in the future. So like the way we have bicycles or cars or escalators and elevators, we will be using portals all the time. And a lot of people do already if you play games, etc. So we began about 5 years ago a big research project looking at portals in storytelling, because we have been imagining portals for hundreds of years, and they feature in everything from religious stories, folklore, mythology, fairy tales, and it's an incredible archive that didn't exist. So we decided to try to build this archive. At the moment, we've only been focusing on portals that we found in popular culture, which then reaches back only about 150, 200 years or so. We can see a few of them here. And we built an archive that currently features about 1,000 unique examples from everything from video games, mainly from books, of course, but TV, movies, operas, radio theater, etc. And we've shown this in a few different places. The first time was at the Sir John Soane Museum in London. And as you saw before, we often build this like very graphic maps. This is a map over a kind of quick overview over the archive. We build, in this case, a series of archetypes that kind of summarizes some of the qualities of different portals found in different stories and put them on a timeline that then you sit around and you can interact with it, you can touch it, at the same time as you're seeing an immersive film that kind of takes you through this archive in a kind of linear narrative format. So we can see some close-ups of that. And let's see if this loads. Here's just a few frames of basically what you're seeing in the film. This is a version of the film that was shown in Vienna last summer. So basically kind of the film is 20 minutes long, and it takes you through basically from beginning to end, the kind of looking at some of these core conclusions that basically this research gave. And sadly, at the moment, this film is not possible to view anywhere. We're hoping to bring it online or distribute it in a more public way soon. This was the installation that we showed in Vienna, a much, much larger table. Again, you sit around it. We can see the archetypes labeled here. But the middle of the 19th century at the center and going outwards towards our time. Also created this huge carpet, which sits underneath the table, which is a kind of stereographic kind of 360 view of a room, a kind of archive full of these portals. And of course, with this speculation and being designers and architects, we of course have been thinking about what should virtual portals be like. You know, we've seen them in a myriad of different versions, water portals, portals that are trees or caves or cars or spaceships, all sorts of things. We wrote this manifesto, which kind of outlines what we think would be the most important things for the future of the fabric of a civic teleportation network. This is available online on our Instagram account, on our website. Won't go into too much detail about this, but and this speaks about sort of the kind of overview, but on a very direct and sort of tactile and experiential level, we came to the conclusion that out of all of the different ways we know how to move through the world and operate with our bodies, textiles, fabrics, we think is potentially one of the most meaningful ways to build portals in the future. And we've explored also this. A lot of our work features textiles, as we'll look at about in a bit. This is a photograph from an exhibition we had about a year and a half ago in Rome, which is featuring a very large installation that's like the size of a building which is all made of textiles. See if this film loads. That basically is a kind of series of layers of textiles that they all spin in different directions. Sometimes they open up portals like this is about to do, and sometimes it closes them. This is work that's kind of reflecting on our research on Aldo Rossi and the future of the virtual city. This is a completely analog installation that's meant to kind of try to create a sense of what it's like to move through virtual environments. And what this symbolizes also is the fact that some cases the installation is closed, or sometimes it's open like this. But at any time, you can always open up the textile. Now, textiles is not thought about as a material that closes space. There's no handle or lock. You can't slam a door made of textiles. We understand it as something soft, something that's soft to the touch, but also something that can contain information. You know, we understand that, you know, humans have been working with tapestries and all sorts of ways to contain information within textiles. Here's a top view of this installation where basically we imagine the kind of roaming around inside virtual environments or virtual cities, like you're in some sort of original point and then you go through a browser space in order to find your way to your destination. So that's the way that this installation is built. Here we can see a sort of overview over how we work. Like this is both a very physical exhibition, but obviously it moves around, and connected to that is also a beautiful sound score created by a music duo called San Geronimo. So like no matter where you are in the space, you can sort of hear in the sound what is happening as it's moving around. And here we see some impressions of what it's like to move around the space. And again, like we can see just a simple movement of the hand can move the wall away so that you can move through space. Again, we based on experience, we worked with textiles a lot. This is photographs from a spa we designed almost 2 years ago, almost 10 years ago, sorry, in Thailand. That's all featuring textiles to kind of give a sense of an endless space. Again, coming back to this example, we think it's really magic to work with textiles because you can create a lot of a sense of information, of space, of experiences that fits in a very small space. And you see these rolls that then, when they're unrolled, kind of creates this very immersive spaces that in some cases in this exhibition, it's almost like a lot of people ask us like, so these renderings or these virtual spaces, were they ever built? I know these are the photographs of the actual spaces. Again, other examples of exhibitions where we use textiles and these music festival stages and all sorts of other projects, and coming back again to the fact that if we build a portal infrastructure in the future, we think that it should be based on textiles. And here is a project that we created, kind of a series of images to imagine the way we think that this should work. So if you find yourself in a virtual environment, or indeed a physical environment that looks like this, you would simply reach out your hand and with your fingers kind of pull a fabric to the side to open up a space to another virtual environment. This kind of portal we've seen a bit in science fiction, some examples of this. And of course, it comes from the sort of inspiration of this archive that we built. And that concludes the presentation. A lot of stuff. I hope you could follow most of it. Almost to the dot, 45 minutes. Hope you enjoyed it. If you're curious, you can find Space Popular on Instagram if you want to scroll through and revisit some of the stuff that we've been showing. And as Darsa said in the beginning, we will now unshare our screen, and very happy to answer questions and continue the conversation. Thank you so much.